Welcome to Australian Politics. I'm Lachlan, and today we're pulling back the curtain on a story that affects every Australian's future. The fight against climate change isn't just happening in laboratories or wind farms. It's being waged in the court of public opinion. And there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign working hard to shape that opinion. In today's episode, we're diving deep into how certain groups are actively working to undermine renewable energy initiatives in Australia, particularly offshore wind farms. This isn't just another environmental story. It's about power, influence, and the hidden forces trying to control our nation's energy future. What makes this investigation particularly fascinating is how these anti-renewable campaigns are masquerading as environmental protection efforts, while carefully avoiding any mention of fossil fuels' devastating environmental impact. It's a masterclass in manipulation that we need to understand if we want to make informed decisions about our energy future. One of the most concerning tactics we're seeing in this anti-renewable campaign is what experts call astroturfing. The creation of fake grassroots movements that appear to represent genuine community concerns, but are actually carefully orchestrated by fossil fuel interests. These groups are sophisticated in their approach, operating through slick, professional-looking websites with names that sound legitimate and community-focused. You might have come across some of them: No Offshore Wind Turbines, Responsible Futures Illawarra, or Australians Against Offshore Wind. They present themselves as champions of environmental protection and community welfare. But there's more to the story than meets the eye. What's particularly clever about their strategy is how they've co-opted the language and imagery of environmental activism. They talk about protecting our oceans, preserving our coastlines, and safeguarding marine life. But here's the telling part. While these groups claim to be environmental defenders, they remain conspicuously silent about the devastating impacts of fossil fuels on these same ecosystems they claim to protect. These organisations have imported many of their tactics directly from similar campaigns in the United States, targeting local communities through highly coordinated social media campaigns. They're experts at spreading their message through Facebook groups, local community forums, and targeted advertising, creating the illusion of widespread grassroots opposition to renewable energy projects. The real irony here is that these supposedly community-driven movements are anything but grassroots. They're part of a well-funded network, backed by some of the biggest players in the fossil fuel industry. It's a classic case of wolves in sheep's clothing, using community concern as a shield for corporate interests. Let's talk about one of the most egregious examples of misinformation in this campaign: the claim that offshore wind farms are killing whales. This false narrative has gained significant traction on social media. But when we look at the actual scientific evidence, the story falls apart completely. Leading experts in marine biology and wildlife conservation have thoroughly debunked these claims. Benjamin Laws, who serves as the Deputy Chief for Permits and Conservation at NOAA's Office of Protected Resources, has been crystal clear on this issue. According to him, there is absolutely no evidence supporting the idea that offshore wind development directly leads to whale deaths. Dr. Olaf Meinecker, a respected research fellow at Griffith University, has gone even further, stating that claims about offshore wind killing whales are absolutely incorrect. Yet, despite these clear expert assessments, these false claims continue to circulate widely, particularly in anti-wind Facebook groups and social media echo chambers. What makes this misinformation campaign particularly effective is its emotional appeal. By targeting people's natural concern for these magnificent marine mammals, these groups create fear and uncertainty about renewable energy projects. They share dramatic images, make emotional appeals, and present correlation as causation, all while ignoring the scientific evidence that contradicts their claims. This whale death myth perfectly illustrates how these disinformation campaigns operate. They take a kernel of public concern about environmental protection, wrap it in pseudoscience and emotional manipulation, and use it to undermine legitimate clean energy initiatives. It's a sophisticated strategy that plays on our best intentions while serving a very different agenda. Now let's dive into the key players behind this disinformation campaign and follow the money trail. At the centre of it all is a secretive lobby group called Advance. You might remember them from their prominent role in the No campaign against the Indigenous voice to Parliament. While they present themselves as a grassroots movement of everyday Australians, the reality is far different. They're bankrolled by a select group of wealthy individuals with significant fossil fuel interests. Advance's structure is deliberately complex, operating through a network of at least 6 interconnected entities. They're not working alone either. They've formed alliances with US-style dark money lobby groups, including the Institute of Public Affairs and the Centre for Independent Studies. These organisations consistently refuse to disclose their funding sources. But through careful investigation, we can identify some of their major financial backers. Let's look at some of the key figures. There's Bryant McPhee, a prominent climate change denier who funneled $900,000 into Advance's campaigns. He's the same person who donated $350,000 to the University of Queensland for climate research, while simultaneously attacking what he calls climate activism. Then we have Trevor St. Baker, a coal billionaire whose company, St. Baker Enterprises, contributed $50,000 to Advance in 2022 to 23. And we can't forget Gina Rinehart, the coal and mining multi-billionaire who's one of the biggest funders of the Institute of Public Affairs and holds an honorary life membership. The scale of this financial backing is staggering. Between 2017 and 2021 alone, fossil fuel interests poured more than $16 million into what appears to be grassroots coalitions fighting against renewable energy. This massive financial investment shows just how determined these interests are to maintain their grip on Australia's energy future. What we're seeing in Australia isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a much larger, coordinated international effort to undermine renewable energy development. The tactics being used here have been carefully crafted and tested overseas, particularly in the United States, before being imported to our shores. Research from Brown University has mapped out how fossil fuel interests work hand in hand with climate denial think tanks and community groups to obstruct offshore wind projects. It's a well-oiled machine that shares more than just ideas. They're sharing personnel, talking points, legal strategies, and of course, financial resources. These are the same organisations that have been working for decades to block meaningful climate policy. The playbook is remarkably consistent across borders. Create seemingly independent community groups, flood social media with carefully crafted messages, and always maintain the appearance of genuine environmental concern. But when you pull back the curtain, you find the same network of fossil fuel interests pulling the strings, whether you're in Texas, Tennessee, or Tasmania. This transnational approach makes perfect sense when you think about it. The fossil fuel industry operates globally, so why wouldn't their resistance to renewable energy do the same? They're fighting to protect their interests on multiple fronts, using proven strategies and sharing resources across international boundaries. It's a sobering reminder that the challenge we face in transitioning to renewable energy isn't just technical or economic. It's also about confronting a sophisticated, globally coordinated campaign to maintain the status quo. Let's get to the heart of what's really driving these anti-renewable campaigns. When we peel back all the layers of carefully crafted messaging and community concern, what we find is startlingly simple. It's about protecting fossil fuel profits, pure and simple. These campaigns aren't really about whales or property values or scenic views. They're about maintaining the profitability and power of an industry that's facing an existential threat from renewable energy. The strategy is remarkably effective. By targeting communities near proposed offshore wind projects, these groups create immediate, localised opposition that can effectively stall or completely derail renewable energy developments. They're not just fighting against wind farms, they're systematically opposing any political action that might reduce fossil fuel industry profits. This includes everything from carbon taxation and windfall taxes to resource rent taxes and Indigenous rights. What makes this particularly concerning is how these campaigns specifically impact Australia's clean energy future. Every delayed or cancelled renewable energy project means more years of fossil fuel dependence. These delays aren't just inconvenient. They're actively harmful to our climate goals and our potential to become a renewable energy superpower. The groups behind these campaigns know exactly what they're doing. They're not trying to win the broader public debate about climate change anymore. They're focusing on creating just enough local opposition to keep their fossil fuel interests protected. The real tragedy here is that communities are being used as pawns in a much larger game. While local residents are led to believe they're fighting for their community's interests, they're actually being mobilised to protect the profits of some of the world's largest and most profitable industries. This isn't about protecting the environment or community values. It's about protecting an industry that knows its time is running out. Thanks for joining us on Australian Politics today, where we've pulled back the curtain on one of the most sophisticated disinformation campaigns currently operating in our country. As we've seen, the fight for Australia's energy future isn't just happening in Parliament or boardrooms. It's playing out in our communities, on our social media feeds, and through carefully orchestrated campaigns designed to look like grassroots movements. As you go forward, I encourage you to approach any information about renewable energy projects with a critical eye. Ask questions about who's behind the messages you're seeing, who's funding them, and what their real motivations might be. Remember that real environmental organisations are typically transparent about their funding and leadership, and they address all environmental threats, not just selective ones that happen to align with fossil fuel interests. Until next time, this is Lachlan signing off. Keep thinking critically, stay informed, and remember, our clean energy future depends on our ability to separate fact from fiction.